Nobody in their right mind starts a marriage by signing a contract to end it. But that was exactly what Tunde and Kemi Okafor did. 3 years, that was the agreement. 3 years of marriage, and then they would walk away like strangers who had only shared an address. No love, no expectations, no children, no sleeping in the same room, no emotional attachment. Just a signature and silence. It started in a quiet office on Victoria Island. A lawyer sat behind a polished desk while both of them sat across from him like two people negotiating a business deal. Not a marriage, a deal. The air conditioner hummed softly. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "So let me confirm," he said slowly. "This marriage will last exactly 3 years." Tunde replied calmly, "Yes. No extensions unless both parties agree." Kemi nodded once. Yes. The lawyer flipped the page. No romantic involvement, no physical relationship, separate bedrooms, separate finances. And after 3 years, a clean divorce with no disputes. He paused and looked at them carefully. "Are you both certain about this?" Tunde leaned back in his chair. His voice was steady. "It benefits both families." Kemi didn't look at him. She simply said, yes. The truth was, neither of them wanted this, but both of them needed it. Tunde's family had a condition in his late father's will. To gain full control of the family company, he had to be married for at least 3 years. Meanwhile, Kemi's family business was drowning in debt, and the Adeyemi family had offered help on one condition: marriage, temporary, strategic, cold, two strangers solving two different problems. The lawyer slid the document across the table. "Then sign." Tunde picked up the pen first. Without hesitation. His signature was bold, confident, final. Kemi looked at the document for a few seconds longer. Her fingers tightened slightly around the pen. Then she signed too. Just like that, their lives became tied together. 2 weeks later, they stood in front of family members at a quiet registry ceremony. People smiled, pictures were taken, congratulations filled the room. But between them, there was distance. After the ceremony, they drove to the house they were supposed to share, a large modern duplex in Lekki. When they stepped inside, the silence between them returned. Kemi placed her small suitcase near the staircase. Tunde loosened his tie. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Your room is upstairs, the one at the end of the hallway." She nodded. "And yours?" "The master bedroom downstairs." Another pause. Then Kemi said quietly, "We should probably go over the rules again." Tunde gave a short nod. "Yes." No emotional involvement, no interference in each other's lives, no questions, no expectations, just coexistence. 2 adults living under one roof, nothing more. Kemi picked up her suitcase and walked upstairs. Halfway up the stairs, she paused. For a brief second, she almost turned around, but she didn't. Instead, she continued walking, leaving Tunde alone in the living room. He exhaled slowly. 3 years. That was the plan. 3 years of silence. 3 years of pretending. 3 years of living with a woman he barely knew. What neither of them knew was that the contract they had just signed was about to become the most complicated promise of their lives. Was about to happen on a night neither of them expected. The first few weeks of the marriage felt less like a relationship and more like 2 tenants sharing a very expensive apartment. Tunde left the house every morning by 7:30, always in a neatly pressed suit, always quiet. Kemi usually had the front door closed while she was still upstairs getting ready for work. By the time she came down, he was gone. Every day. In the evenings, they returned at different times. Sometimes Kemi came first. She would walk into the large living room, drop her handbag on the couch, and sit in silence for a while. The house was beautiful. Modern furniture, large windows, soft lighting. But it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a hotel suite that people passed through. Temporary. Just like the marriage. The first real conversation they had after moving in happened 3 weeks later. It was a Wednesday evening. Kemi had just finished making tea in the kitchen when she heard the door open. Tunde walked in, loosening his tie. He stopped when he saw her standing by the counter. For a second, they both looked slightly surprised, as if they'd forgotten the other person lived there. "Evening," he said. "Evening," she replied. Silence again. Kemi poured tea into 2 cups. She hesitated, then pushed one across the counter. "You can take it if you want." Tunde looked at the cup like it was a peace offering. "Thank you." He took it. They stood there drinking quietly, not looking at each other. Just 2 people sharing a kitchen. Over time, these small moments started happening more often. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just normal things. One night, they both ended up in the living room watching the same news broadcast. Another evening, they discussed Lagos traffic for 5 whole minutes. Once, they even argued about whether generator fuel had finished. Tiny conversations. But they were conversations. One Saturday afternoon, Tunde walked into the living room and found Kemi sitting on the floor surrounded by documents, files, calculators, business reports. Her brows were furrowed in frustration. He stood there for a moment before asking, "Everything okay?" She looked up. "Oh, yeah." A pause. Then she sighed. "Actually, not really." Tunde stepped closer. "What's wrong?" She hesitated. Then she said quietly, "My family's company. The financial restructuring is worse than we thought." Tunde folded his arms thoughtfully. "What kind of restructuring?" For the next 20 minutes, Kemi explained. He listened, carefully, occasionally asking questions. By the time she finished, she looked slightly surprised. "You understand business analysis?" Tunde shrugged. "I run a company." She gave a small smile, her first real smile around him. "Right." That night, something shifted. Not romance, not yet, but the house felt less cold. Weeks passed. They started eating dinner at the same table sometimes. Not planned, just coincidence. Their conversations slowly stretched longer. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Sometimes they even laughed, very briefly. But one rule of the contract remained untouched. Distance. They still kept emotional space. They still slept in separate rooms. They still reminded themselves this marriage had an expiration date. 3 years. No attachments. No complications. No feelings. What neither of them realized was that the quiet friendship growing between them was already breaking the first rule of the contract. And soon, something small would happen. A single night, a simple decision, one moment of concern that would change everything between them. By the second month of their marriage, the house no longer felt like a hotel. It still wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was something in between, something quiet, something slowly learning how to exist. One Tuesday evening, rain poured heavily across Lekki. The kind of Lagos rain that turned the streets into rivers and kept everyone trapped wherever they were. Kemi arrived home soaked despite her umbrella. She dropped her bag near the door and sighed. From the living room, Tunde looked up from his laptop. "You didn't drive?" "Traffic was insane," she said, pulling off her shoes. He closed his laptop. "You should have called me." Kemi frowned slightly. "For what?" "I could have picked you." She blinked. The thought had clearly never crossed her mind. "You were at work." "So?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked past him toward the kitchen. But something about that sentence lingered in the air. "I could have picked you." Later that night, the power went out. The house suddenly went dark. "NEPA again," Kemi muttered from the hallway. Tunde stood up and grabbed his phone flashlight. Generator should come on. It didn't. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, Tunde groaned. I forgot to refuel it. Kemi laughed softly from the staircase. That surprised both of them. You run a whole company, but you forgot generator fuel, she teased. He walked toward the door. Mock me later, let me fix it first. Outside, the rain had slowed into a drizzle. Kemi watched him through the window as he struggled with the generator house. After a few minutes, the machine finally roared to life. Lights flooded the house again. When Tunde stepped back inside, slightly wet from the rain, Kemi handed him a small towel. You look like you wrestled the generator. I won. Barely. They both smiled. It was small, but it was real. Little by little, their evenings became easier. Sometimes they talked about work, sometimes about Lagos. Once, they even talked about childhood. That night surprised them both. They were sitting in the living room after dinner. The television was playing quietly in the background. Kemi was the one who spoke first. My parents used to fight a lot when I was younger. Tunde looked at her. She hadn't meant to say it out loud, but now the words were already in the room. That's why you don't believe in marriage? He asked gently. She gave a small shrug. Maybe. A pause. What about you? She asked. Tunde leaned back against the couch. My father believed marriage was a partnership. And you? I believe contracts are simpler. Kemi studied him. You really think feelings complicate everything that much? Tunde didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked quietly, have feelings ever made your life easier? Kemi didn't answer either. Both of them understood the silence. A few days later, something strange happened. It was late evening. They were standing in the kitchen at the same time. Kemi reached for a glass. At the same moment, Tunde reached for the same cabinet. Their hands brushed, just slightly. Both of them froze. It was nothing, just a small touch, but the moment stretched longer than it should have. Kemi looked up. Tunde was already looking at her. For a brief second, the distance between them didn't feel like part of the contract anymore. Then reality returned. Kemi pulled her hand back first. We should probably stick to the rules. Tunde nodded slowly. Yes, but something had shifted. Something small. Something dangerous. Because for the first time since signing that contract, both of them had felt it. The possibility of something more. And neither of them knew what to do with it. That same week, something unexpected would happen. A night that would start normally, but end with Kemi sitting alone in the living room at 12:30 in the morning, staring at the door, waiting. Because Tunde had never come home that late before. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she couldn't go to sleep without knowing why. That night started like every other night. Quiet, predictable, safe. Tunde had left the house that morning at exactly 7:28 a.m., adjusting the cuffs of his shirt as he walked out the door. Kemi had been upstairs getting ready for work. By evening, she returned home first. She reheated some leftover rice, ate alone at the dining table, and scrolled through her phone absent-mindedly. At 9:15 p.m., she glanced at the wall clock. Tunde was usually home by 8, sometimes 8:30, but rarely later. She told herself not to think about it. After all, this was a contract marriage. They weren't responsible for each other. Still, her eyes kept drifting back to the clock. 9:42 p.m. Maybe traffic. 10:18 p.m. Maybe a late meeting. By 11 p.m., the house had become unusually quiet. Kemi had already gone upstairs. She tried reading, tried watching something on her phone, tried sleeping, but sleep refused to come. Finally, she sighed and got out of bed. This is ridiculous, she muttered to herself. Yet, somehow, a few minutes later, she found herself sitting in the living room downstairs, waiting. 11:37 p.m. The house felt too large, too silent. Kemi wrapped a light sweater around herself and curled slightly on the couch. She checked her phone again. No message. She frowned. Why am I even worried? They weren't friends before this. They barely knew each other 3 months ago. And yet, something about the empty house bothered her. 12:16 a.m. The front gate finally creaked open. Headlights flashed briefly through the curtains. Kemi sat up immediately. A few seconds later, the front door opened. Tunde stepped inside. He looked exhausted. His tie was loose, his shoulders heavy with the kind of tiredness that doesn't come from physical work. He kicked off his shoes and rubbed the back of his neck. Then he looked up and froze. Kemi was sitting on the couch, wide awake, looking directly at him. For a moment, both of them just stared. "You're still awake?" he asked quietly. Kemi stood up slowly. "You are late." He checked his watch like he had only just realized the time. Work ran over. There was a pause. Then she asked, "Did you eat?" The question caught him off guard. "No." She nodded toward the kitchen. "There's rice in the microwave." Tunde blinked slightly. "You waited?" Kemi shrugged quickly. "I was already awake." The lie hung awkwardly between them. Tunde studied her for a moment. Then something in his expression softened. "I didn't expect anyone to wait up." Kemi folded her arms. "Well, the house felt strange." "Strange? You're usually home earlier." Tunde didn't reply immediately. Instead, he walked slowly into the kitchen and opened the microwave. The warm light illuminated his face. He stood there quietly for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you." 2 simple words, but something about the way he said them felt different. A few minutes later, he sat at the dining table eating. Kemi leaned against the kitchen counter. "Rough day?" she asked. Tunde sighed. "The board is fighting about company expansion." "That sounds like money problems." "It's ego problems." Kemi laughed softly. "I believe that." They talked quietly while he ate. Nothing serious, just small conversation. But something about the moment felt warmer than usual. When he finished eating, he stood up and carried the plate to the sink. Then he turned to her. "You didn't have to stay up." Kemi looked away slightly. "I know." Another pause. The house was quiet again. But the silence no longer felt empty. It felt aware. Tunde stepped a little closer. Not too close, just enough that the space between them felt smaller than before. "Kemi," he said softly. She looked up. For a second, neither of them spoke. And in that moment, both of them understood something that scared them. The contract they signed was beginning to lose its power. Because somewhere along the line, without planning it, without permission, they had started caring. And neither of them knew what that meant for the 3-year agreement waiting quietly in a lawyer's office. After that night, something between them changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a door inside the house had been left slightly open. The next evening, Tunde came home earlier than usual. Kemi was in the kitchen cutting vegetables when she heard the door. "You're back," she called out. Her voice sounded natural, comfortable, like she had been saying it for years. Tunde stepped into the kitchen and loosened his tie. "You're cooking. Don't sound so surprised. I thought you lived on takeout." She laughed. "I do. Today I decided to behave like an adult." He leaned slightly against the counter, watching her. "What are you making?" "Jollof rice." Tunde raised an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous dish." "Why?" "Because everyone thinks their own version is the best." Kemi smirked. "Well, prepare to be impressed." That night, they ate dinner together. Not because it was convenient, but because they wanted to. The conversation moved easily. Work stories, childhood memories, random jokes about Lagos traffic. At some point, Tunde laughed so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. Kemi stared at him, amused. "I didn't know you could laugh like that." "What does that mean?" "You always look serious." "I run a company." "Still." She smiled. "I think I prefer this version." The words slipped out before she could stop them. And suddenly, the air changed. Just slightly. Tunde looked at her differently, like he had just noticed something he hadn't allowed himself to see before. Later that night, they were in the living room. A movie was playing on the television, but neither of them was paying attention. Kemi sat at one end of the couch. Tunde sat at the other. At some point during the movie, Kemi said quietly, Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Are you happy? The question lingered. Tunde didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back slowly. I used to think happiness was overrated. And now? He glanced at her. I'm not sure anymore. Kemi looked down at her hands. That sounds complicated. It is. Another silence. But this one felt heavier, more personal. A few minutes later, the power suddenly flickered. The television went dark. Only the soft generator light from outside filled the room. Kemi sighed. Again? Tunde chuckled. At least this time it's not Phil. She laughed. Then she turned slightly toward him, and suddenly they realized how close they were sitting now. Closer than before. Much closer. Neither of them had noticed when it happened. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. No jokes, no conversation. Just quiet understanding. Kemi's voice came out softer than usual. Tunde. He didn't respond. His eyes were still on hers. Slowly, very slowly, he leaned forward. Kemi didn't move. Her heart was racing. She knew exactly what was about to happen, and part of her wanted it. The distance between their faces grew smaller. The moment stretched. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Then suddenly, Kemi pulled back. Both of them froze. The reality of what almost happened hit them at the same time. The contract, she whispered. Tunde sat back immediately, running his hair through his hair. Yeah. The words sounded heavier than they should have. The contract, the rules, the agreement they had both signed, the invisible line they had just nearly crossed. For the rest of the night, they kept their distance. Polite, careful, controlled. But something had already been exposed. Something neither of them could pretend to not see anymore. Because for the first time since the beginning of this arrangement, it wasn't just friendship growing between them. It was something deeper, something far more dangerous, and both of them knew it. The problem was, the contract had 2 more years left, and feelings were not part of the agreement. After the night they almost kissed, the house became quiet again. Not the cold silence from the beginning. This one was different, careful, measured, like 2 people walking around something fragile on the floor, trying not to step on it. For the next few days, they returned to the rules. Dinner was shorter, conversations were lighter, they avoided sitting too close, even their eye contact felt controlled. But pretending was harder now, because once you recognize a feeling, you can't unrecognize it. One evening, Kemi was in the kitchen, washing dishes when Tunde walked in. She felt his presence before she even turned. You're home early, she said. Board meeting ended faster than expected. He stood there for a moment, watching her rinse a plate. The water ran quietly between them. Finally, he said, Kemi, can we talk? She turned off the tap slowly. That sounds serious. Maybe it is. They moved to the dining table. Neither of them sat immediately. The air felt heavier than usual. Kemi folded her arms. What's on your mind? Tunde exhaled slowly. I've been thinking about something. The contract. He gave a small surprised smile. You read my mind. Kemi pulled out a chair and sat down. That thing has been hanging over our heads since day 1. Exactly. He sat across from her. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Tunde said quietly, when we signed it, I thought it was the smartest decision I could make. Kemi nodded. So did I. But now, he continued, I'm not sure it still makes sense. Kemi looked at him carefully. Because of the almost case, Tunde didn't deny it. That was part of it. A pause. Then he added softly, but not the biggest part. What is? He held her gaze. You waiting up for me that night. Kemi blinked. That was nothing. No, it wasn't, he said gently. The room fell silent. Tunde leaned forward slightly. I've been around people my entire life. Business partners, colleagues, friends who only show up when it benefits them. His voice softened. But that night, someone waited. Kemi looked down at the table. You're making it sound bigger than it was. Maybe, he shrugged, but it mattered to me. Kemi stayed quiet for a long moment. Then she finally spoke. You know the funny thing? What? When we signed that contract, I was counting the days until the 3 years would be over. Tunde raised an eyebrow. And now? She gave a small, honest smile. Now, I haven't thought about the countdown in weeks. Something warm moved through the space between them. Tunde reached into his briefcase. Kemi frowned slightly. What's that? He pulled out a familiar document. The contract. The same one they had signed months ago. Kemi stared at it. You carry that around? I picked it up from the lawyer today. Why? Tunde slid the document across the table. Because I think we should rewrite it. Her eyes lifted to meet his. Rewrite it? With different terms. Kemi leaned back slightly. And what would the new terms be? Tunde smiled faintly. No expiration date. No emotional distance. And definitely no separate bedrooms. Kemi laughed before she could stop herself. Are you serious? Very. He leaned forward. But this time, we don't draft it alone. Who does? Tunde met her eyes again. We do. Kemi looked down at the contract for a moment. Then she picked it up. Carefully, quietly, and tore it straight down the middle. The sound echoed softly in the room. When she looked back up, her smile was warmer than he had ever seen. Well, she said calmly, I guess we should call the lawyer tomorrow. Tunde stood slowly. Why tomorrow? Kemi tilted her head. What do you mean? He stepped closer. Close enough now that there was no contract left between them. This time, he said gently, there's no rule stopping me. Kemi's heart raced. So what happens now? Tunde smiled softly. Now, he reached for her hand. We start the marriage. And for the first time since signing that contract, they both knew this was the one promise they actually wanted to keep.